Thanks, guys, for coming to Formtastic. I think it's quite remarkable that we managed to get 261 people registered for a conference about web forms and paper forms. If you were at our conference in the fall, you know that we were sort of trying this sort of experiment to get civic tech and legal tech talking together more. And so I was really happy to partner with Sid in this conference because forms is something that is all legal tech and all civil tech, or civic tech. We're all dealing with forms every day. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nicole Raddick. I'm the CEO at Theory and Principle. We are a design and development agency on the justice space and the legal tech space. I had one question about what is this event? So our goal is to both have speakers at sort of short intervals. So we have three 15-minute talks, and then hi Rose. Oh, bye Rose. She'll be on in a minute. And then sorry about that. What am I saying, Sid? Pick up.
You were saying that we're trying to give space for community as well in between the talks. So it's sort of like a virtual conference with a lot of hallway time.
Yes, absolutely. All right, now Sid, you can introduce yourself and introduce us to the what we're going to be doing today, and then I'll be back to talk about our first speaker.
Absolutely. So hi, I'm Sid Harrell. I'm an independent civic design consultant. I work with both executive and judicial branch clients, and I'm the author of a little book called Civic Technologist Practice Guide. And welcome to Formtastic, everyone. It is so great to have you. We are here today basically because I've said this a million times and it's a rough estimate, but if 70% of government interactions involve a form, interactions in the legal system, it probably gets close to 90%. They're one of the biggest determiners of experience. The state of them as of now is perhaps farther from the desired state than almost any other non-policy part of the government system. There are people attending this event who are working on everything from design to automation to language to policy and many more things I haven't even mentioned. And that's part of why we set this up as a community event. We're going to hear from 3 speakers on different aspects: web form design, paper form design for trauma-informed form filling, which is one of those accessibility questions that's really important. And then a pretty geeky talk on data for forms and how to manage that. So I'm really excited for that. And in between, we don't know what will happen, but we do know that it'll be interesting. And just the tiniest one slide code of conduct. This is a conference for everyone. It's a conference with mingling. Please do be respectful and don't be a jerk. If you run into any trouble, contact one of us and we will address it. We expect this to be super fun and productive. So just take care of each other and we expect that's what'll happen. Here's our schedule for today. You can also find it in the upper right of Remo, just next to the little Remo logo. There's a little calendar icon and that'll pop down when the short talks will be happening. At all other times, we'll have table and hallway discussions. We have 2 floors. The first floor has some topic tables and the second floor has some open tables, and you're welcome to roam wherever you like. I think Nicole's going to give a little more information about how Remo works. I know a lot of you figured it out during the first mingling period. I'll just say that it's been a longtime dream of mine as a civic designer to have an entire large cohort of people out in the world addressing all of the issues with forms and so much the issues that people have when trying to get access to government to exercise their rights or get services that they need. So it's incredibly exciting just to see this crowd on a weekday at an event like this. And I hope you have a wonderful time. And I'll turn it back to Nicole.
Thanks, Sid. Yeah, a few notes about Remo. We like this platform a lot because it is very conducive to chit-chatting with other people, meeting people, sharing ideas. And so a few things to note: people can't see that you are in a room unless you turn your camera on and your mic on. Those are at the bottom. When we go back to the sort of chit-chat part of the event, you will see on the far left side the different floors. So if you want, usually the first floor is more crowded, and if you need more space to have a private chat with somebody, you can go to the second floor on the left-hand side of your screen. The other things to note, we have a rule that you can feel free to ghost. We're here to try to get everybody get the most out of this conference. So if you're in a conversation that's not super relevant, you don't need to interrupt to say, I'm sorry. It's you have permission to be super rude and ghost the table and go somewhere else. There are 2-person tables on the side because I know there's a lot of introverts here, so this type of format might be a little bit overwhelming. Feel free to use those to take a break. Most of my team fit in that category. And then there's a chat window below. Feel free to hit the chat anytime to ask any questions about logistics or anything else. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna hop right into the presentation. And I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Rose Devlin. She is a UX UI designer with Theory and Principle. And I've worked in product for a while now, and she's one of the best designers I've ever worked with. And so I'm excited for you guys to learn from her. I think when she joined Theory and Principle, she probably didn't realize just how much her life was going to revolve around forms. But we do a lot of work in forms, and so she's really fine-tuned the requirements over the time that she's been with us. So I think there's a lot to learn from her. Rose, are you able to pop up? There she is.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, and you should be good to share your screen. I am going to turn my camera off, which I think should make me disappear. Let's hope.
Okay. Wow. Thanks for that introduction. That was very nice of you. I'm just going to pull up my screen. Yeah, so I have been working in forms for 2 years or so with Nicole. I love forms. I'll be talking about web forms today. And just some background, I have about 15 years of experience working in web and application design. I used to work in other fields such as e-commerce, healthcare, and fintech, but I've spent the past 2 years in legal design. But luckily, forms are pretty similar across industries. Today I'm going to be talking about what is a form? What is its purpose? What questions do we consider when redesigning or creating a digital form? We'll look at some bad forms out there and talk about some best practices. And then I'll show you a case study where we moved a paper form to digital. And lastly, I'll show you some of the most common UX fails. So what is a form? It's basically, a printed or typed document with blank spaces for insertion of required or requested information. They can be short and simple, and then they can be long and complex. They can be multi-page, multi-sided, conditional, convoluted piece. They can sometimes even require pages and pages of instructions. We've designed a lot of forms here at Theory and Principle. Some of them are pretty simple, where you just ask a few questions of the user to guide them to legal help. Others are in the form of a chatbot. And others are kind of multi-section, large forms to help people enter a large amount of data. So what questions do we consider when redesigning or creating a form? One of the first ones is, who is the user? We tend to think about age, tech savviness, occupation, amount of time available to do the form, their family life, and more. This information can influence how they fill out the form. It can influence the voice that we use to communicate with them and the overall design. We also like to think, where are they filling out the form? Are they filling it out on paper and then entering it in? Are they filling it out on their phone? They might be distracted. Or are they filling it out at the library or at home with kids? And will they understand the questions? A lot of times they won't. Which parts will they struggle with? And how can we help them overcome those struggles? How can we make it clear, which parts of the form do they need to fill out? Which parts don't they? And then lastly, what is the purpose of the form? So how much extra information will the user need to look up? How much time will this take? And how big of a deal is this to the user? So for example, if they make a mistake on a newsletter sign up, that's a much bigger deal. It's a much bigger deal to make a mistake on an important government form. I know this from personal experience because one time I made a mistake on my husband's green card application and delayed the whole process for 3 months. Some other form considerations, obviously length, so number of questions, number of pages. Do we need to include explanation text? Do we need additional documentation? Can the user fill it out in one session versus coming back and doing it multiple times? And then, so the format is also important to take into consideration. What types of questions will we be asking here? Is it just, select checkboxes versus radio buttons, or are we asking them to fill out a lot of data? And are the questions in the form of questions or just labels? Also, will we ask the questions one at a time versus having multiple on one long page? And then will the form have conditional logic, which is where the form changes depending on certain answers? We also like to consider, does the user have access to the internet and how might this affect the format of the form? So there are a lot of bad forms out there. This website is for filing sales tax in the state of Maine. It's not terrible, but it's not great either. So I'm just going to go through a few things that are wrong with it. So the first thing is confusing section titles. They're all the same kind of font and weight, same as the title of the whole form. And they're also blue and they look like links, but they are not links. There's a lot of repetitive text at the top that is really unnecessary. The labels, they're on the left, so that just makes it a little bit harder to scan. And then in this case, they don't actually line up to the actual text field form. And then lastly, all of the buttons are at the bottom and they're the same weight. So it's really confusing where, where to click when you're finishing the form. I mean, most people would probably want to click just save changes, but we have 3 other buttons there. So how can we make a bad form good? This is an example form that I was recently tasked with redesigning. So just for some background, it's a multi-step form. This is just one of the steps within the process. There's a progress bar, but it's not very accurate in telling you your real progress within the form. One of the first issues with it is that there is a drop down for US or non-US resident, and really that should be radio buttons because there's only 2 answers for that. And then next, there's a text box for address, which is not standard. And then also this button has the button issue as well. There are 4 different buttons that are all the same weight, which makes it very confusing to know where to click next. So we are redesigning this form. In the redesigned version, we're showing all of the sections in the left-hand navigation with indications of completed versus current section, as well as uncompleted sections. In the right, we've changed the drop-down to be radio buttons and have used a more standardized block for address. We've also updated the buttons so that we are using different weights for primary button, secondary button, and tertiary button. The user also in this case has the ability to navigate between the sections, so there's no reason to go back to a home page. Now I'm going to talk about some best practices for web forms that we try to follow here at Theory and Principle. So one of the first ones is to prepare the user for what they will need to fill out the form, especially with long forms, but in general, this is a good practice. You want to let the user know how much time is needed, any important information that they'll need to have, so important numbers, dates, etc., any files or documents that they'll need, and also any preparation that they can do beforehand. With long forms, it's also important to group questions into logical sections. So this helps to organize long forms, and it can also help you to point out specific information that you'll need for each section, similar to what we talked about in a previous step. A bonus tip is to ask the easy questions first to get people engaged. I think a lot of subscription sites do this, where they ask you just, your name and what you're interested in, and then at the very end, they ask for your credit card information. Another piece of best practices is to let the user know their progress. So we can use a progress bar, we can list out the steps in the navigation, or we can just say you're in step 1 of 5. And another one is don't ask unnecessary questions. This one is very hard for lawyers. Lawyers like to be able to include every piece of content possible, But by minimizing the amount of questions, we can decrease cognitive load and increase form completion. And the right is a graph by Baymart Institute for reasons for abandonment during checkout. And the third top reason is too long, complicated checkout process. Another best practice is to make clear which fields are optional versus required. So the best way we see this in most websites is just an asterisk next to the field to let you know that it's required. Another way to do this is to show only the fields that are optional, which I personally prefer. I think it makes it a little bit easier to scan rather than seeing the red asterisks everywhere on every field. But I think the jury is still out on this best practice because there are articles that argue that the asterisk is still more clear to certain users. So another best practice is to use placeholder text, but don't put it in the field anymore. Placeholder or hint text helps users to understand field requirements. But the problem with putting it in the field is that it's often too light to be able to comply with ADA compliance for web accessibility. And then when we make it a little bit darker, it looks like the field is already filled in. So we've had issues with that. A better solution is to just move the hint text below the field, which still gives the user the ability to see the format that they need to fill out that form. Explain why the form is asking a question. So this one is important, especially with sensitive information like contact numbers, social security number, and questions about race, ethnicity, and gender. In this example, race, ethnicity, and gender are asked by the organization for reporting purposes when applying for grants. So we included that in a dropdown and made the question optional. And the last best practice I'm going to talk about is to help the user complete the form faster. There are many techniques to do this. One is to autofill information that you already know. Another is to use conditional logic to only show applicable options. And the last is to employ scanning techniques to upload common documents. So in this example, the user can upload a photo of their driver's license to quickly fill in their name, date of birth, and driver's license number. So this was a product to help users get their license reinstated after being suspended. And now I'm going to talk about a case study where we moved from a paper form to a digital form. Our client is a fair housing center that sends testers to apply for apartments and look for evidence of systemic discrimination in housing. Our role was to digitize this 10-page paper form that testers use to document their visit. And it's a very detailed form that asks questions like, describe the agent you spoke with, down to their age, hair color, height, weight, and whether they wear glasses or not. And this typically takes users about 2 to 3 hours to fill out. And before we started designing, we needed to understand who the users were, both those who filled it out and those who were reading the answers. And by understanding these needs and conditions, we could make sure that by digitizing the experience, we wouldn't cause more issues than potentially fixing. Some of the highlights that we came up with were that users often filled out the form in their car before they forgot something. So right after visiting the apartment, they would just kind of fill out information about the agent or the apartment so they wouldn't forget. Some users like to jump around the form and not be forced to answer sequentially. And there was a lot of unnecessary space and text for conditional questions that aren't applicable to everyone. So digitizing the form in this case made a lot of sense. The final product was a responsive, multi-section, easy-to-use form. The benefits were that it was mobile first, so users could still pull up their phone right after doing a visit to a rental. The sections were grouped logically, so they could easily jump between them. By making it digital, we could include tooltips and helper text, as well as conditional logic to make it faster overall. Some of the challenges that we had by doing this were that we still had issues with scannability, meaning that some people were just used to the paper. They always remembered that the question about the agent was at the bottom of page 3. And another challenge was tech savviness. So lastly, I'm just going to go through 5 common UX fails. The first one is wrong element usage. So usually it's not helpful to have yes and no be the answer for something. And in this second option, if you have a drop-down with only 2 items, it should probably be radio buttons as well, because having to open a drop-down and then select something is 2 clicks versus just 1. Another UX fail is when the fields and text don't have enough contrast. So this is related to accessibility. There's not enough contrast between both the border around the field as well as the text within the field and the field label to comply with ADA compliance for web. So these need to be darker. Another one is super long labels with no reason. This is an old Amazon registration page where the field label was my name is, my email address is, my mobile number is. Just adds to clutter on the page and makes it harder to scan. Confusing or unclear error messages. So if we just say error found, that doesn't really help the user just figure out what they need to change. A better way to do this is to let the user know exactly what the issue is. So in this case, the email already has an account. And then another one is accessibility. Does the tab button work? So can you tab from one field to the next? And then lastly, this is actually number 6, not 5, making it look different just to be different. So this one is exaggerated, but as designers, we often try to make our work stand out. But it's important not to overlook the best practices of form design because users are accustomed to filling things out a certain way. So we try to stick to kind of those best practices overall, but at the same time, we believe in making your form as bold and beautiful as possible. Thank you. I'll be in the tables if anyone wants to discuss further.
Mic on. Thanks so much, Rose. I appreciate that. And as a lawyer, I definitely never put too many words in anything. So I don't know what you're talking about there. Well, we're going to move now to some networking. If you have ideas for table topics that you'd like me to add, pop them in the chat. And otherwise, we'll be back here in about 20 minutes to hear from Francis Ho from the Judicial Courts of California.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.